Well, hi there. Welcome back to Leading Learning Moments. This is Chris Summers. Today, I'm excited to be with you and talk a little bit more about the second tier, the second deficiency need in our PLC Commitment to Learning Pyramid framework. How we can develop our PLCs on our campus to be thriving and productive for our students. So the second tier that I want to talk about today is called consistent response. And what I mean by that is I want you to think about the systems that are in place to routinely and successfully handle the student learning needs on your campus. I absolutely believe that consistent response is a deficiency need because it delineates effective teams from ineffective teams. What I mean by that is this. Let's take a look at this slide. I want you to think about ineffective schools or not just ineffective schools, but the typical response that schools have when students are struggling. I mentioned that consistent response is about really systems that are in place. And a typical response to struggling students isn't really systematic at all in a lot of schools. The intervention's often left up to the discretion of individual teachers or teams, which means sometimes teachers respond very differently depending upon their competency, their confidence, or their desire to do so. And in the worst case scenario, there's no response at all. And so what I want to challenge you with is thinking about systems that are in place on your campus that allow for continuous instructional supports to happen. It provides students with timely and corrective feedback and implements a consistent sort of school-wide system of supports. When we do that, then we begin to shift out of this typical school response to struggling students. Now, I want to highlight to you kind of how consistent response really affects student learning and sort of the experience that happens in the classroom by giving you sort of two examples, talking about the constants and the variables that typically exist in the school setting. And that is around instructional practices, the quality of the instruction, the time, and the learning. So here's, in this first slide, take a look at ineffective schools. What they typically do is they allow the quality of instruction and the learning time to be constant. And the results of that is that learning is oftentimes a variable. And what I mean by that is usually the master schedule or teacher assignments or instructional sort of resources drive the decisions that happen on a regular basis. And in turn, what happens is some students get it and some students don't. Now, some teachers and leaders might say, oh, well, no, that doesn't apply to us. Well, we would never just be okay with learning being variable. But it becomes a little bit difficult to argue to the contrary, again, when we kind of have this set practice and delivery model on our campus and we're not fluctuating the time and the resources. So let me give you an example of how it might look a little bit different. So here's what effective schools do in terms of the constants and the variables in the classroom. Instead, most effective schools keep the learning as the constant and they make necessary adjustments, that's the consistent response, to quality instruction and time to ensure that students are learning. And what this might look like is this. All students receive high quality instruction provided by qualified personnel to ensure that student learning difficulties aren't due to inadequate instruction. Also, instruction is provided in a multi-tiered approach to struggling students. The frequency and the duration, that's the time of core instruction and interventions, are guided by student needs and routine informal and formal assessments. Student progress is measured frequently and relies on multiple data points that gives this holistic view of the mastery of the learning objectives. And then lastly, every teacher delivers high quality instruction and interventions with fidelity. And so what I'm talking about is this consistent response. It lays the groundwork. It takes care of those deficiency needs in the team, on the campus, in your students, quite frankly, with the teachers, that allows us to then focus on those growth needs, is what we'll talk about next time, is common work, and then obviously the culture of learning. And so when we think about consistent response, I want you to think about again, the systems that are in place in your team or on your campus that create this routine. No kid gets missed. No kid flies off the radar. And we're constantly adjusting our instruction and our time in learning to meet those student needs. Hopefully that illustrates a little bit for you why I think it's a deficiency need, and why if a team is not prepared, ready, and actually pretty fluent in doing this, it can make all of the other work that happens in a PLC in terms of meeting student needs and thriving as professionals and thriving students very, very difficult to do. So I have much more information about this on my blog. I mentioned this last time. I have a blog, Leading Learning Matters, through WordPress. The link is there at the bottom on the YouTube video, as well as when I post this up on Twitter and my Facebook page. It'll have the link there to the blog that you can get to. And in that blog, I provide a little more support. I can go into more depth than I can on this video. And on the blog, I help out leaders and teachers. If you're wanting to kind of assess where is my team at in terms of consistent response, I've got some questions for you to kind of go through and begin to process and see how your team is doing. And then hopefully that kind of gives you the momentum and the ideas about how you can grow the systems in your team on your campus to provide that consistent response. Next time, we're going to talk about the first growth need, which is common work. The focus on common work is, what do the teams do? What do they focus on? And then what do they do? And kind of the big piece of common work is about developing collective teacher efficacy. That's a term that I think is gaining some popularity in education right now. It started a little bit from John Hattie's visible learning research, and it's actually, if you keep up with his research, he's the one who kind of lists the effect sizes of various things that we do in education and how it impacts student learning. And collective teacher efficacy is now, bing, 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 the very top one on his list. It's a 1.57 effect size, so it has a dramatic effect on student learning. And so common work, what we're going to talk about next time, really is the mechanism for developing collective teacher efficacy. So I'm excited to talk about that next time. And I think that we begin to look at the growth needs and how we make our PLCs very dynamic. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope that you'll come back next time for that. So I hope that today's conversation about a consistent response, following that up from last week where we talked about collaborative professionalism and how we sort of embrace the work as a professional educator. I hope understanding those two deficiency needs and how they can then allow us, set the table for us to thrive as a PLC have been helpful. And until next time, I hope that you have a great day. I hope that you continue your work on PLCs, continue making a difference for our students, and remember that leading learning matters. And I appreciate you coming by for this leading learning moment.